Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. It's great to be with you here. Today's going to be an interesting conversation. We're going to talk about our brains and how they work, I think, today with my guest, Joseph O'Connor. Joseph is the co-founder of the international coaching community and one of the best known and respected coaches and trainers in the world. So it's a real pleasure for me to have him on the program. He's, author of 19 books in 30 languages on coaching, training, and neuroscience that have sold over 500,000 copies worldwide. Joseph, it is a real pleasure to have you. Your latest book is called Coaching the Brain. So we're going to talk about that today. So it's a real pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Rhett. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a good talk here.
Well, so the point of the show is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are making a big difference in the world, people that we can learn from. So that's the whole point of the show. Glad to have you. I got to start with, the world has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, 20 years. You were sort of in the forefront of the coaching industry. Talk about how is coaching different than even a decade ago?
Oh, wow. It's well, as you say, the world is changing and everything's changing with it. Coaching certainly has evolved tremendously. I mean, if we go back now 20 years when I met my wife in Brazil, she had a business card that said she was a coach, and an awful lot of people did not know what that was. They either thought she was in the travel industry or she was a sports coach of some sort. And that was how it was. And then, of course, it's developed amazingly since then. And interestingly, with results and taken up by business rather than any kind of charismatic presence saying what good coaching is. And a lot of academic involvement too, which has been it's been really great. So, well, it's grown tremendously. It's got a lot of respect. It's now that I guess, at least from my experience, talking from my experience, I'm an executive coach. I really enjoy talking with executives and finding out what they do. And that also, of course, has tremendous leverage in terms of the business because of their decisions. Yeah. So that's what I do, but also that's the one-to-one coaching. Further on down in businesses, I'm involved much more in training in-house coaches, so training managers as coaches. Not that they're going to be kind of coaches as such, but the coaching skills that they get are making them a very much more effective manager. So that comes in much more now, as does team coaching, as businesses have moved more and more towards teamwork. So coaching too has needed to evolve from a one-to-one, which it was to begin with, into now specialized team coaches. And of course, that's different. A team is not just one big person. It's very different. You've got different dynamics. So there's a whole generation of good team coaches coming up now with a lot of emphasis on training that. So those are a couple of things I've seen. And then, of course, from my personal point of view, until a few years ago, the perspective of neuroscience, how the brain actually worked, was really lacking in a lot of psychology and coaching. So that's got me interested because I'm always interested in what's missing. And I think that's added a lot as well to the effectiveness of coaches over these last years.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a few minutes because I want to understand that a little bit more. And I think the coaches that listen to this program, would be really keenly interested in what you're talking about. Has the pandemic changed us? In your view, and with the people that you're working with, has the pandemic changed coaching at all? Has it coached? I mean, you were talking about group coaching. Is it changed sort of businesses' view on what they need, or are there some new skills that you're seeing your executives and your managers that they're needing that coaching can provide?
Wow. there's a lot of things there. Of course, it changed things dramatically in a few months, beginning of last year. And so businesses had to adapt very, very quickly. And this was very difficult. And a lot of businesses found that they thought they were quite nimble, but they weren't nimble enough. So there was a lot more emphasis on that kind of element, decision-making, strategy, but quick strategy, getting things moving very quickly, changing very quickly. So I saw that. Of course, the pandemic has changed our relationships with each other. I used to do a lot of traveling. I used to do a lot of coaching face-to-face. Now it's pretty much all by Zoom. And that's okay, but it doesn't completely replace the face-to-face connection. So there's, in that sense, a little bit missing there. What else? Of course, a lot of individual stress and anxiety, and well-founded on that. People are more stressed. They're being called to do things differently under a threat of the pandemic and the virus. And this has meant a lot of people having to deal with a level of stress and anxiety that, of course, will affect their day-to-day well-being and decision-making. And that's come into coaching quite a bit as well.
I love the title of the book, Coaching the Brain. And then the subtitle is Practical Applications of Neuroscience to Coaching. Talk about that. I mean, because that's the essence of the book, I'm guessing. But
yeah.
Explain that to us in sort of layman's terms, so we understand what you mean.
Okay, well, coaching the brain, I'm not trying to reduce people to just a brain. We are human being and everything, body, soul, spirit. But the brain part, the physical part, I think has been left out of coaching to a large extent. Even to the extent of for example, the brain needs sleep. If you are going to be focused and a good decision maker, you need that. And yet I've met many executives who will cut down on sleep, 4 or 5 hours. Well, it's enough. I need to get on with my work. I need to do this. And that's actually quite the opposite of what you need to do, because the brain's a physical organ and it needs sleep. For example, that's one thing. Coaching the brain, I wanted to focus in on that, and particularly on the neuroscience research that's happened. Well, neuroscience has just expanded so amazingly over the last 10 years. We have understandings that we just had no idea about before. And I think that needed to come into coaching in terms of refining some of the models that we use, and also generating some new ones. So I got very interested in that. I started off with a brain scan myself, and understanding myself from that point of view, which was extremely interesting. So that's the focus of it. And I wanted to avoid two issues with neuroscience and coaching that I've seen around. One is the kind of simplification issue of, there's right-brained or left-brained people or something like that. Big simplifications that really don't do the justice to people or indeed the brain. And the other is the opposite, where you sometimes find thinking that if you learn all the Latin names of the brain parts, then this is going to also make you either a better coach or understand things better. And of course it doesn't. It doesn't make any difference. So I wanted to go between those two, and I wanted to make it first and foremost practical, because I like to write, and what I like to do is to take knowledge and information, figure it out as best I can, and then put it onto the page in a way that people can pick up and use straight away, with as many of the difficulties ironed out as possible, which is my job as an author. So that's what I was trying to do.
Talk a little bit about how to be emotionally intelligent. I think that was one of the key themes that I thought was really, really powerful, and the importance of feelings.
Oh yeah. Well, again, especially at the executive level, there's a lot of focus on, thinking and cognition and decision making, and that's fine. And while I say decision making, decisions are made primarily by the emotional part of the brain. Basically, the best way we make decisions is to collect information and memories, all of which have an emotional tinge, and then weigh those up, so that in the end, the decision is an emotional, it's driven by emotions. So the important thing is to make sure that you have good information to feed in to the brain, and then let the brain do its part. We don't make the decisions logically. It would take far too long. We'd be, taking hours even to decide what suit to put on in the morning.
Right.
So
go ahead.
Yes. So emotional intelligence. Well, again, we pay a lot of attention to cognition and goals and those sort of things. But in the end, what really drives us is the emotion. What are the difficulties that happen in businesses? They're mostly driven by people, and they're driven by people's emotions. And emotions are not exactly illogical, but they don't follow logic either. They don't follow reason necessarily. They're not unreasonable, but they have their own reasons. The heart has its own reasons, as they say. So I think it's really important to understand how emotion works, which is, for me, emotion is a feeling, bodily feeling, and we all know those, plus a meaning, because it means nothing otherwise. Something could mean very different things depending. It could be the same physical feeling. I mean, the physical feeling of excitement and fear are very similar, but the meaning that we put on them is what's important. So when you talk about emotions, what you're talking about is, yes, we feel, and that can take us over to some extent. The meaning that we put on, so it's extremely important that we understand what our values are and how we respond to things. And emotional intelligence is, I think, 4 things, really. It's the ability to be aware of your own emotions. So you've got to actually sense them. Otherwise, all the training in the world won't help you deal with them, because if you don't sense them, you'll be just into them before you can take a breath. So being aware of that, self-awareness, and then various strategies to deal with that feeling, because there's always that little moment of clarity whereby we can decide to use the energy that we have, particularly in anger, for example, in a constructive way, rather than let it just run, which is often destructive. So those are the first 2 things. Second 2 would be for other people. So again, being aware of what other people are feeling. And we don't want people to, burst into tears before we've realized they're feeling sad. We don't want people to explode and lose their temper as the first clue that they're actually getting a bit annoyed. So it's about, again, awareness of other people and how they're feeling. And then, of course, the ability and the strategies to be able to deal with that without getting pulled in, without getting triggered, without getting the emotional contagion that often happens.
Is it, and I'm trying to sort of phrase this question, and when in our coaching, should we be trying to elicit these feelings and these emotions and bring these emotions and these thoughts and this out in our clients? I mean, is this because there's probably a school of thought that says we really should stay away from emotion and feelings and things, but is this something we should be looking at and trying to get to the bottom of and explore with our clients?
It's a really interesting question. And of course, it does differ depending on different coaching schools. For example, in Latin America, the ontological coaching does and wants to deal very much more with the feelings, and they do try to elicit feelings.
Hmm.
Whereas Europe and United States more about cognition, you know, the thinking, and the feeling comes afterwards. I think that we can, let's put it this way: there's no thinking without feeling, and there's no feeling without thinking. It's just a matter of how they're balanced.
Hmm.
So whether we're talking about ideas with people or whether we're talking about feelings with people, there's going to be a mixture of both. There's going to be a mixture of emotion and cognition. So I don't set out to trigger any particular emotions from people. They'll happen. Those will happen quite naturally as we go along. If we touch difficult subjects, the emotion will be there. Um, it's not usually enough that it will take over a session. I mean, I've never had anybody lose their temper with me, for example, nor would I want that.
Right.
But I had people break down in tears, and it was surprising in some way because it can come quite in an unexpected context. I mean, I remember I was coaching an executive. It was in Chile, and she was talking about coaching and charging for her services.
Hmm.
And this seemed to be a very straightforward conversation. You know, how much should I charge? And we were talking about this, and she started. I just noticed she was starting to get, you know, quite sad, and then suddenly she did burst into tears. And you know, at that stage, best one can do is say, "Fine, I see that this is, you know, we've touched on a sensitive subject, so take your time. Here's some handkerchiefs, you know, just relax, and we'll pick it up if you want to in a moment." So, you know, she was quite touched. And then when she kind of got back to herself, she said, I didn't realize how sensitive that was. It wasn't just about money, it was about how I valued myself.
Right.
And money was just a marker. And the difficulties she had in setting a price reflected that, you know, how much am I worth? How much do people value me? How much do I value myself? And this got mixed in, and it came up in the conversation. And it was very good that it came up in the conversation, because we could have, you know, kept very cognitive and said, oh yeah, well, you know, the usual rate is this and this. Why don't you charge this and this? And you know, fine, but not as helpful as getting to the issue. And I, you know, I didn't dig in any way. I had an intuition that there was something behind it, but I didn't try to force her to into the emotion. But you know, when clients
Right.
are ready, the emotion will come.
And it's good that she sort of made that connection, right? And could then, you know, on her own and with your help, sort of, you know, explore, you know, those feelings. I wonder too, because I do a fair amount of group coaching as well, and I get the sense that this could be a really powerful, thinking about things in this way. It could be a really powerful way to work in groups, because because there is a lot of there are a lot of dynamics, and there are emotions, and there are feelings, and um, those impact the culture, and those impact the how the organization works together. And I think, particularly in this day and time when we're talking about remote work and these massive shifts on how we work and where we work from and how teams work together, and group dynamics, and the stress of all of that. I think, do you see that this is this sort of thought process, or what you're talking about here, could really be helpful in our group coaching?
Yes, and group coaching is different thing altogether, especially with emotions. Of course, again, it depends on the culture. Many cultures want to keep those emotions out of the team.
Right.
Other
I don't think
cultures
you can
want them
help.
in
I don't
there.
know that you can help that, though, because when you have a group of people together, you're going to have.
Yeah, people react to people, and you know, that's the way it goes, and that's fine, as long, again, as a team coach, you can constructively channel that energy. That's important. But
Mhm.
let me pick up on one thing that's really interesting, really interests me anyway, and something that I've used in terms of groups and emotion, and it's what we might call emotional distance or emotional spacing or psychogeography. In other words, The configuration of how people are in space, how they sit down, who's close to who, how they arrange themselves, actually is an interesting reflection of the group emotional dynamics.
Interesting.
So, and it's kind of obvious in one way, people who like each other will tend to sit together, for example. But it's, you can come into a room and you can look at the way that the people have sat down naturally, the psychogeography of the room, and you can think, okay, well, that looks like the leader, that looks like a couple of friends, that looks like the person who it doesn't really fit in. Okay, well, let's see how we go. And this can give you not only good information about that, but also you can use it in terms of, let's change round, let's change our seats. Let's get out from behind the table, because some of these tables are terrible for getting people together in a group where energy can flow.
Right.
Some of those long tables, it's like people face each other and it's immediately confrontational. Just the very language and the spacing of it is confrontational. You are facing the other person front to front. Right. So let's get away from the table. Let's sit around in a circle and let's see how we go there. So that's something I've got very interested in terms of that emotional spacing. And it's something, of course, that doesn't work on virtual meetings for Teams. You can't do it. You're all, everyone's got their every little face appears there, and it really doesn't make any difference where they are to you or anyone else. So that's something I think that we lose in virtual meetings, and it can be very powerful.
That's a great segue. We could probably have a whole talk on the virtual here, but I'm curious, how have you seen sort of the virtual environment that we're working in now? What impact has that had on your teams and your groups that you're seeing? Is it, and I don't want to just assume negative, but is it negative? Is it positive? Are there sort of good and bad, or what's your view on virtual work and having people not in one location?
I think, and this is just my experience, both my personal experience and my experience of working with people. There was a time when it was virtual or nothing, basically. That's it. You've got to go virtual. So there was that dynamic personal energy and element that went missing. And there's no doubt about that. We're human beings, thousands of years of evolution, and we are used to meeting people face to face. When that doesn't happen, it is more difficult, but our brain is amazing at being able to adapt. And so we adapted, and we can do it virtually. We can do it with the pictures on the screen. We can immerse ourselves in this kind of virtual environment and still be able to have a conversation and get things done and coach and everything else. So from that sense, it works, or we've made it work. And we can make things work pretty well when we put our mind to it. And the technology, of course, is getting better and better. And I'm sure that in 10 years' time, or even less, we're going to be putting on our headsets, walking into virtual rooms and meeting avatars of virtual people and interacting as if this is real. Now, that will be very interesting. I wouldn't like to say how it's going to turn out in the end. Because it's a whole new way of being that our evolution has not prepared us for. Yeah. We are very adaptable. It's just that evolution takes hundreds and thousands of years to to change things. It's quite slow. To do it over 10 years could be a challenge. So we shall see. But that's, I think, the way that we're going.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of pushback on that.
There will be. Absolutely.
But you're right. I think that is most certainly the way it's going. I interviewed an AI machine the other day and had a conversation about my childhood and about car. I mean, it was really crazy. But let me ask you this: you talked about, and we just need. I'll go back for a second. We need to have another conversation about that by itself, because that's a fascinating conversation there. You talked about how in the book how your brain works as a prediction machine. What does that mean?
Well, it means basically that, and this is, well understand this, human beings need to be able to know what's going to happen next. Otherwise, it's random. One of the things that we really are not good at is dealing with random environments where we have no control. So our brain has evolved in order to be able to predict as far as possible what's going to happen next so that we know what to do. And this relieves a great deal of anxiety, of course, and helps us a lot. So this is what we learn. We learn, basically. We start off by not knowing when we're children, and we learn, and we build up a series of predictions or mental models, as I say, of basically what is going to happen next. The sort of world we're in, the sort of way that people react, the sort of person that I am, which of course can be highly skewed by early experiences, as you can imagine. And then we react to other people and the environment and the situations according to those mental models. Now, a lot of the time they work pretty well, no problem. When they don't, then we have to learn. So that's what the brain is doing all the time, trying to predict what's going to happen next so I can prepare for it. Now, the only problem is that we have this blind spot confirmation bias, whereby we tend to ignore those things that don't turn out the way that we think they're going to turn out, or we devalue them, or we think that it's not representative or something like that. And we notice much more than we should those things that actually reinforce our mental models of how things are, because we want to feel safe and secure. So any reinforcement is fantastic. Unfortunately, though, of course, that does give us biases, and in many ways we don't learn from experience. We say we learn from experience, but we don't, unless we notice the difference between what we think is going to happen and what actually happens. And of course, as a coach, and you've probably heard this one too, one of the coaching sayings is, it's not the problem that's the problem, it's the way that the client is thinking about the problem that's the problem. And seeing as coaches can't change, other people, they can't change the environment for the client, they can't change the other people, significant other people for the client, they can only change what's going on in the client's mind about how they think about that particular issue and that particular circumstances that they're in. And it's a problem for them, and you don't deny that. But what you can do is to allow them to see things a little bit differently, change some mental models, see perhaps if some of the mental models built on previous experience, which they're trying to apply to their present experience, aren't really adequate. And of course, as technology and business changes so rapidly, this is what's happening.
Yeah. Joseph, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
So, where can people get the book?
Where can people get the book? Well, any bookshop online. It's widely available.
Okay.
It's
Barnes & Noble, Amazon, everywhere like that.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. And do you have a website people can go to?
Yes, it's very easy to remember. www.coachingthebrain.com.
There you go. Coachingthebrain.com. I want to thank my guest, Joseph O'Connor, today for being here. The book is called Coaching the Brain, Practical Applications of Neuroscience to Coaching. I think if you're a coach, you need to pick this up and read. And I'm sure if you wanted to reach out to Joseph, I'm sure he'd be delighted to chat with you. Thank you for being on Power Lunch Live today and spending some time with us. We'll be back next week with another episode. And until then, have a great week. Be productive, and we'll see you then.
Yeah, thanks, Rhett.
You're welcome.